Hey, I'm younger, prettier, and much nicer than your wife, ain't I? And we get so much more excited when we do this.
Yes.
The sight I saw through the doorway made me gasp and let loose. In the living room, my naked father and my mother-in-law Charlotte were in the middle of having fun. I hope this is a dream. I don't want to believe this. Shock, disappointment, sadness, and a mixture of emotions made me nauseous. How dare he does this to me? How dare he betray our family? The last thing that welled up in me was a burning anger. I took a deep breath, leaving my phone at the ready. I kicked open the living room door in a fit of rage. My name is Tori. I'm an office worker and a housewife. My husband Elvis and I got married about 5 years ago. We belong to the same department in the same company. And there were many occasions when we helped each other, both publicly and privately. So we became very close without either of us saying a word. After 3 years of dating, we were married.
I'm home.
Welcome home. Good work today. Both Elvis and I were busy with our jobs and had no children yet. My mother always urges me, I want to see my grandchildren as soon as possible. But for now, we are still looking forward to spending a little more time together as a couple. Then one day, on a holiday, I went back to my parents' house to pick up some clothes. My parents' house is about a 20 minutes drive from our house, so I can easily go home whenever I want. I am very thankful that I can turn to them immediately if I have any problems. When I finished taking the clothes I needed and went to the living room, my mother was making me a cup of tea. How are you doing lately? Is work going well? Yeah, well, reasonably well. My mother and I sat down on the sofa and talked about what was going on with each other. How are you doing, Mom? Are you and Dad fighting? I asked jokingly, and suddenly my mother's face contorted. I wondered if something had happened to her. She took a sip of her tea and opened her mouth to say, Actually, my mother told me that my father had been acting strangely lately. My father had just recently retired from the company where he had worked for many years. Since then, he has been spending his time at home, taking it easy, doing nothing in particular. I think he's just taking it easy now that he doesn't have a job anymore, right? My father was always a workaholic who was rarely at home. Now that his job, which had been the center of his life, is gone, he doesn't know what to do. He may be at a loss. In fact, I have heard such stories here and there. However, my mother shook her head and said, It's not like that. She said that his attitude toward her was somehow cold. Take, for example, the conversation during meals. He used to tell funny stories about things that happened at work, or about how delicious something in his lunchbox was. However, recently, he just moves his hands silently and hardly continuing the conversation, even if my mother talks to him. In addition, when she sits down next to my father, who is relaxing in the living room, he stands up awkwardly and returns to his room saying,
I'm tired.
She said that this kind of strangely distant attitude has been increasing recently. Maybe you just care too much? Dad must have his own reasons. If that's the case, it's fine. I talked with my mother about it and left that day. I went home and thought back to the conversation I had with my mother as I prepared the meal. I told my mother not to worry about it, but I was a little concerned about it myself. If my mother was just overly concerned, that was fine. But what if my father had something on his mind? My father is getting old. Maybe he's sick or something, and he can't tell my mother about it. If that is the case, I would like to listen to him. My father might not feel comfortable telling my mother, but he might feel more comfortable telling me. I decided to take the plunge and ask my father. On a holiday the following week, I went back to my parents' house. Every Saturday, my mother went to work. My father should be alone at home. Now, my father should be able to talk without having to worry about my mother. With this in mind, I unlocked the front door. As usual, I stopped moving to pull open the front door. I hear a strange voice through the narrow opening of the front door. I wondered for a moment whether or not I should turn back, but I stepped into the doorway, determined to find out the identity of the voice. I walked down the hallway, trying to make as little noise as possible. The voice seems to be coming from the living room. As I approached it, I wondered again whether I should turn back. No matter how you look at it, the voices which I'd be afraid to listen to in the daytime were coming from inside. But I had already come this far. I couldn't live in such an ambiguous state. I put my ear to the door and listened to what is going on inside. I hear my father's happy voice.
Come on, let me take a closer look.
You're so impatient. As if I answer, I hear a woman's voice. Of course, it was not my mother's voice. When I heard that voice, I was a little shaken. Charlotte. It was unmistakably the voice of Charlotte, my mother-in-law. My parents and parents-in-law don't interact much. They only see each other once a year or so. How did this happen? My mind went blank, but somehow I managed to maintain my composure. I haven't checked inside yet. There is a possibility that I'm mistaken. Or rather, I hope I am mistaken. Just the thought of my immediate family and in-laws having that kind of a relationship makes me want to vomit. With trembling hands, I put my hand on the living room doorknob. Slowly, I opened the narrow door so as not to make a sound. The sight I saw there made me think I was going to have a stroke. The first thing I saw was two people's clothes, which had been taken off in a messy manner. The woman's voice was my mother-in-law, and on the rug in the living room, the two of them were in the middle of it. Oh no! My head shook with shock, as if I had been hit with a blunt object. Was this how my father's attitude toward my mother had changed? He had betrayed us, and behind our backs, they were getting it on like this? As a parent, or even before that, as a human being, he should not be allowed to do this. And moreover, to have done it in a place like this, when my mother was not around, I will not allow it. I will never ever forgive him. What came after the shock was a burning anger. Even if he's my parent, if he hit me, I would hit him back twice as hard. I glared at the two, still indulging, and pulled my phone out of my pocket. Less than a minute later, I was ready to go. I took a deep breath to pull myself together and kicked the living room door open as hard as I could. "What are you guys doing?" I yelled angrily at them, and they jumped up like little animals and looked at me in utter surprise. After a short pause, my father, who seems to have come to his senses quickly, rushed out without picking up his clothes. Wait! Wait a minute! My mother-in-law was also in panic and ran after my father. I followed after my father, determined not to let him get away, and my eyes met his just as he closed the closet door. With a loud noise, my father and my mother-in-law were hauled up in the closet. Before I could think, I quickly grabbed the duct tape that was close at hand and quickly taped the closet. They were banging on the door from the inside, as if they had noticed something was wrong.
What are you doing? Don't be stupid.
That's my line. You should know what you have done yourselves. I put several layers of duct tape and a wardrobe full of clothes to block the door. I take out my phone and open the call app before I can even catch my breath. I press the call button, and soon there is an answer.
Tori, what's wrong?
It's my father-in-law on the other end of the phone. He seemed a little surprised, as I rarely call at this hour. I'm sorry, but I need you to come over to my parents' house right away. I said so that they could hear me in the closet, and I heard my mother-in-law scream. Next, there was a loud banging on the door. No, Tori! This man asked me to come. It's not my fault.
What? You're the one who asked me out.
Completely ignoring the ugly argument in the background, I quickly called Elvis and my mother. About 30 minutes later, my father-in-law, Elvis, and my mother gathered at my parents' house.
Tori, what the hell is going on?
I haven't told them any of the details yet. I just want you to come over here. I told them to come over. Then I headed for the back room. I guess they cooled down after some time. There were no more excuses or banging on the door from inside the closet. I could sense her gasp of breath, perhaps sensing our presence. What is this? My mother was perplexed by the strange appearance of the closet and its surroundings. Just watch. I moved the wardrobe out of the way and peeled off the duct tape. They were probably surprised by the sound, because I heard a scream from inside. I opened the door, and my father and mother-in-law, who are not wearing any clothes, jumped out from inside.
Charlotte?
Oh, you! My mother-in-law, who was facing my father-in-law, who still do not understand the situation, seems to be at a loss for words. My father was tight-lipped and looked away as if to avoid our gazes. My mother seems to lose her mind at the sight of my father, and when she wobbled, Elvis helped her up. Well, let's have him explain. I clapped my hands loudly, and my father and mother-in-law shook their shoulders. After a few moments of silence, they seemed to realize that there was no escape and began to tell me the story of what had led up to this point. After you and Elvis got married, I kept in touch with this man from time to time, my mother-in-law said, hiding her body with a bedsheet beside her. At first, they would just talk on the phone about what was going on and complain to each other. Gradually, they started to see each other as a man and a woman, and their relationship developed to the point where they would go out together. Then, on the day they drank alcohol together, they got drunk and just left it at that. I was about to cover my ears when my father-in-law, who had been silently listening to them, stepped in front of me. My mother-in-law was startled and clung to his feet. I'm sorry. I won't do this anymore. You will forgive me, won't you? Hey! My father-in-law said nothing, but stares at her as she begins to cry. Then, he let out a sigh and called his wife's name.
Charlotte, I'm divorcing you.
My mother-in-law's face, which seems to have been hoping to be forgiven, turned pale with despair. Oh no! Don't say such a thing! Why would you do such a terrible thing?
Which one of us is the terrible one? Don't you feel any shame after what you have done?
Elvis, who was still supporting my mother, came out next to his father. Elvis, too, seems to be very angry. In a quiet but sharp tone, he chastised his own mother. My mother, who is usually so kind-hearted, was giving my father a hard look this time. My father took one look at my mother, then looked away again without saying a word. If that's the way you are going to treat me, I'm going to have to respond accordingly. Let's get a divorce. We both will. My father, expecting her to say that, still did not say anything. In the event of a divorce, I will charge both of you alimony. My father's face finally moved as he heard my mother's words.
I don't think I can pay that.
That's right. We don't have that kind of money.
We are retired.
My mother-in-law also raised her voice in reproach, as did my father, who was shouting in anger. I looked at them with cold eyes, as they fussed in an unsightly manner, and then pulled out my smartphone from my pocket. Then, I guess I can do whatever I want with these pictures, right? As soon as they saw the screen, they let out a hiccup and froze. There, they could clearly see the two of them in the middle of the scene. They had no idea they were being filmed, and their faces turned an amusing shade of red. By the way, I took a video of it. When the case goes to trial, I will have this footage played as evidence. I know the judge and the bystanders won't be able to watch it. Frankly speaking, I want to erase this thing right now. I don't want to have this filthy thing. But if this would make these two people take responsibility, I could bury it. Since you don't seem to understand, let me tell you. May I? If you do something wrong, you will be punished accordingly. If you still have any humanity left in you, then accept it maturely.
Okay.
When I said this without hesitation, my father became silent again, and then reluctantly agreed to the alimony. A week had passed since the incident. My mother divorced my father, and my father-in-law divorced my mother-in-law. My father was kicked out of the house and now seems to be working a day job. The other day, my father came to me.
I can't pay my bills, so I need your help.
He said, "Why don't you take responsibility for what you did?" I hung up the phone and never heard from him again. According to Elvis, my mother-in-law is no longer a full-time housewife and is working several part-time jobs. While I was relaxing in the living room, Elvis came over to me with his phone in his hand and a fed-up look on his face. That face. Could it be about Charlotte?
Yes, that's right. I've had enough of it.
My mother-in-law, being herself, said to Elvis, "I want you to pay the alimony for me. And have you forgotten how much you owe me for raising you?" It seems that she contacted him several times. Elvis has refused all of her requests.
She's very persistent, so I got mad at her a little while ago.
That's tough. I hope she doesn't call again.
Yeah, I blocked her number from my phone. If she still keeps calling, I will change the number.
Perhaps the rejection of her calls had an effect, because after that day, my mother-in-law did not call him again. Then, one day on a holiday, after all the problems had been resolved, the phone on the table rang. It was my mother. "Hello, Mom?" My mother had quit her job. She had a large sum of money coming in from alimony payments from my father and ex-mother-in-law. It seems that my father-in-law had done the same. It was also because he was just on the brink of signing a post-retirement re-employment contract, so he chose to retire without hesitation. "How about we all go on a trip together sometime? Of course, Elvis' father is coming with us." "Sounds good. When?" This experience has brought our family closer together. We often go out as a family these days. I have always liked getting together with a lot of people, and that made me a little happy. With every bad thing comes a good thing. As I discussed travel plans with my mother, I thought about the future and laughed a little.